Hello guys, welcome to Chasing a Murder, Talking News with Debbie. And today we are working on moving forward in the series Life Beyond the Grave. Right now we are on part 7 and we're going to cover a little bit more on Lori Vallow's life. And this series is definitely going to teach you the people that are involved with her life, how they connect to her. Hopefully making it a little bit easier to understand what is going on in this crazy case. Where did we leave off? So we left off with Lori Cox growing up in California, close to Rialto. According to her mother, Lori loved to play softball along with Summer, her mother being the coach for at least 3 years. And she said she tried to pull Lori off the mound and Lori just refused to do so. Lori also did dance and she was a cheerleader for her high school. But the most important thing to Lori was her faith. And she was really kind of different from everybody else when it come to that. She was very loyal to her faith, let's say. It took priority in her life, and it also had to do with a lot of her decisions, but sadly she was struggling with herself because when she left high school she thought that she would go to BYU and that she would go on a mission, but that didn't happen. Instead, Lori gets married. She marries once to her high school sweetheart, which didn't last very long. Secondly, she married a man that lives in Texas. We're going to call him Goya. They have kind of a really bad relationship. She's trying to get him to basically take her faith. And she's wanting him to be very loyal to it. But sadly, Goya is not able to keep that promise. And according to affidavits of the past, this relationship was very toxic and it got very abusive. So she ends up leaving him. And we know that he's no longer in her son Colby's life from then on. And Lori is living with her mother or her parents for a period of time. So while Lori is a very young adult with a son, Lori has an older sister. She goes by Stacy. And she's married to a man, and we'll just call him Cope. And this young Mormon couple have a baby by the name of Melanie, which might be familiar to you because this is the young lady that will grow up to be involved with this case. We're not going to talk about Melanie at this time, but we are going to talk about her parents. I believe that Stacy Cox's story plays at least a bit of a role in some of the things that are going to happen in the future. From 1991 to 1996, we will cover mostly Stacy, but at this period of time, Lori is married and divorced once and marrying her second husband, LaGoya. And Stacy Cox is now Stacy Cope. And somewhere in this timeline around 1990, Tammy Daybell and Chad have just got married. The marriage between Stacy and her husband Cope starts off a bit rocky. She tells him that she takes a whole bottle of pills. He says he'll call 911. She says, no, don't do that. That she didn't really take the whole bottle of pills. This is very interesting, and we wonder why she does this. Stacy says her excuse for doing this was to get attention. But why would she want attention in that manner? Did she do this after she had her baby? Was she dealing with postpartum depression? We don't know. Around October of 1993, Stacy is starting to get sick. She's dealing with health issues. And she decides that she's going to take neuropathy correspondence classes. This is natural medicine. So the diabetes that she's getting, she's thinking that she can take the natural route. Stacy believes that she can take garlic at night to ward off the disease that she has. Not only that, she's having Melanie take it as well at night before her bedtime. Cope notices that his wife's condition is getting worse every day, and he believes this is attached to the fact that she's refusing to take insulin or listen to the doctors that are trying to help her get better. This also starts to wear on their marriage, so they're arguing quite frequently. Stacy notices that she's getting tingling in her hands and feet. But Stacy is the type of woman that believes in faith. She is the type of woman that won't give up on something once she makes her mind up. And this might end up hurting her more than helping her. Stacy's parents offered to pay for a vacation to Hawaii, so she refuses to go to the doctor and goes to Hawaii instead. On that vacation, Stacy hadn't taken her insulin. And when they return back home, they stop in Los Angeles because this is close to her parents. And about immediately after she lands, she ends up going to Loma Linda Hospital for treatment. Cope claims that he's there by his wife's side while she's in the hospital, but there's a point where he needs to go back to work. And so he heads back to work. Reading through the documents, it seems that he's completely irritated with the fact that she hadn't been taking the insulin. Now, Stacy's going in and out of the hospital at this point at least 3 times. And now he's having to spend Christmas with the Cox family, which he is not keen about. Not at all. And in documents, he shows even more aggravation about the fact that he has to leave Melanie in the care of Stacy's family. He is not happy about that at all. So why is it he doesn't like the fact that his daughter's with her parents? Well, Stacy had told Cope that her father had schizophrenia and that he has a history of mental problems. Then she went on to say that her mother is always worried about the appearance of herself and the family, and somehow that this was some kind of mental issue. Not sure how. So, interesting. It appears that Cope is using this information he learned against his wife in order to gain some kind of custody of his daughter. Quite interesting. Right near Christmas time, Stacy returns home, but she isn't home long because she complains that her stomach feels like it's trying to devour itself. This is something I want you guys to pay attention to and note. Stacy tells her husband that she's having very intense stomach pains and that she's feeling very weak and very fatigued. I want you guys to realize or remember that the stomach issues that she's having, she's at home with her family during this, according to the documents. This is something that I believe is important to this case or should be at least looked at. So definitely take this information and keep it here until we get to Tylee. Stacy's in the hospital again, and at this time Cope has to return to work, and so he does. But he's hoping that he and his wife and his daughter will return home soon. But that doesn't happen. And this is because Stacy has several more health issues that end up causing her to go back to the hospital a few more times. And this happened between January and March of 1994. Stacy is having some tests run, and doctors actually discover that she is dealing with nerve damage in her intestines. And this will end up causing her all types of issues in the future because she's not able to absorb the nutrients that her body needs. It was difficult for me to put this in exact order, but it's pretty close. But Stacy is dealing with a lot of medical issues. And she also seems to be dealing with depression, which is normal when you're sick all the time like she is. And they're having marital problems based on her medical issues. Around January of 1994, Stacy actually tests positive for Epstein-Barr virus. And according to her husband, she thinks that her daughter Melanie also has caught this virus. Because of this, Stacy isn't sending Melanie to school. This being a concern for Cope, he actually starts talking to the wife of the bishop of their church. And they make arrangements that she and he would take Melanie to and from school, trying to help Melanie miss less school. But if Melanie says that she is not feeling well or that she's just tired, she decides to go ahead and just keep Melanie home from school anyway. So this is a problem. Around this same time, Stacy's sister, Lori Cox, she's wanting to be a hairstylist, so she's studying to be a hairdresser. And around April of 1994, Cope says that his wife is becoming more and more erratic. She isn't taking her insulin still, and she's just not acting right. Cope alleges that his wife starts spitting at him and blowing snot and throwing her mug at him whenever they discussed her medical issues. In the divorce documents, it seems that Cope has this concern for her well-being and her medication, yet he really doesn't seem to grasp the fact of how high sugar levels affect one's mind and how that can change somebody. We're moving into May 21st of 1994, and it seems that Cope is able to have these exact phone calls where he is concerned about her mental health, but he doesn't seem to understand how to spell what she's diagnosed with or how to even describe what it can do to her body. He seems more concerned of just making Stacy look pretty bad for being sick. And in this phone call on the 21st, she's concerned that she doesn't want to live any longer, and then she's talked to her parents about this, and they agree it's her time to go. On May 22nd of 1994, she calls her husband again and tells him that she feels like she just doesn't have any hope. She explains to Cope that if she has to have a line put in to eat again, that she's going to tell them that she just doesn't want it. She sounds like she's very overwhelmed and just not feeling good at all. Just a few days later, the 25th of 1994, Stacy calls her husband again and tells him that she feels like she ought to just take the whole bottle of insulin. But she says with her luck, she probably wouldn't die. It is obvious this woman's going through a lot of pain, and she just feels at this point, no matter what she tries to do, nothing's helping her. And then this part of the document, this really kind of got to me. I mean, seeing what this entire family's going through, it's heartbreaking. And it's this exact part that got me the most. So, May 31st, 1994, Stacy calls her husband again. She tells her husband that she really wants to be Melanie's mommy, but she can't do it feeling the way that she does. She'd rather just die. Reading these documents, he seems distressed, concerned about her well-being and not taking care of herself like she should. But somebody this sick can't do it alone. They gotta have help. It just seems to me that Cope is finding every reason to point the blame towards Stacy, yet she's the one that's sick. She's really sick. He is claiming that every time Melanie comes back from her parents' house that she starts acting strange and cussing, using words like shit, cutting her hair straight across. And to me, this says a lot, that he will take anything and manipulate it to fit the situation. In documents, he even writes his concerns to a judge, suggesting that Mellie be taken away from her mother so she doesn't feel like a caretaker. That's pretty cold. Not saying that Stacy doesn't have struggles being a parent, because she does. She even wants to homeschool Melanie, which is not a good idea at all. It is very clear that Cope does not like Stacy's family, and probably is one of the main factors. But Janice seems to love this guy, so I don't understand what happened between them two. As they approach closer to the divorce, he suggests that when Melanie visits her mother, that she be supervised while she has her. Cope says that Stacy's no longer using the insulin around July of 1994. She has deemed it to be evil. Reading these documents deeper, you find out that Cope really doesn't seem to have concerns for Stacy's welfare at this point. He hasn't tried to have her admitted or committed, because she's not capable of making decisions on her own. He just continues to blame and yell. He has admitted multiple times that he knows that her sugars are dangerously high at this point. It seems to know what is best. But again, he doesn't seem to understand that a person with high sugar levels is not capable of thinking clearly. And so in these documents, I just see everything that he is saying is just an attempt to try to get Melanie in his care I'm not saying that he doesn't care about his wife, but it just seems to me that he doesn't have this concern, or doesn't know how to get the concern needed for his sick wife. That's my opinion based off of what we know right now. Stacy is getting infection after infection at this point. She's dealing with, teeth issues, personal issues, and ridiculous high sugar counts. And at this point, Cope knows that his wife's intestines are also kind of shutting down. Stacy's immune system is run down, and she wants to take the extra precautions to prevent germs at this point. But her husband finds this to be a mental issue and only works against her. So she wanted to sanitize things extra or to be more careful. He doesn't understand this and finds this as a mental problem. He just seems to blame her for everything that's not going right. And as we move into September of 1994, Cope isn't sure how to handle his sick wife, like I mentioned. And Stacy's head isn't right because she's just so ill. She's refusing to go to doctors. She's throwing fits. She's crying. And he doesn't even call ambulance, where I think he should have. He lets her have control over a situation she shouldn't have control over. So if he's going to call, she says, no, don't do it. And he doesn't. And I think this is a situation where he probably should have made her go to the ER. He's concerned because now Stacy is treating food like it's evil. In other words, she's peeling tomatoes and then washing them to make sure there's no germs. And socializing is dangerous because of the phobia of germs. So she's worried to hang out with any of the kids, which kids carry a lot of sickness, or Melanie's friends. So this is interfering with Melanie's social life. But it makes sense. She should be concerned about those germs. So he says that she's mentally dwindling away. And you can see where her husband's losing hope. And Melanie is starting to miss months and months of school. Now you can see where her husband is kind of saying things like Melanie is not allowed to drink milk from cows because milk is only for cows. Now that might be a bit of a phobia. He said that he invites his sister and husband over to spend a night one night, and Stacy throws a fit on the floor. She's screaming and kicking. He doesn't go into details as to why. For 2 hours, he says that she's unstable or unable to move, which is an interesting statement. You mean to tell me he has no idea if she's there because she just can't move? Interestingly, he doesn't call an ambulance that time either. It is obvious she is most likely dealing with high sugar. And even more interestingly, if you watch the interview of their daughter Melanie later on, which is many years later, she's grown, she's talking about her mother. It's obvious that when you read this document and compare it to what she says, she really had no clue, even at that time, whatever happened to her mother. By October of 1994, Stacy feels as if she just don't want to live anymore. And her husband is trying to convince her that life is worth living. He still doesn't understand, how she feels. That's obvious. And also around the same time in October 1994, Stacy's husband makes a puzzle for Melanie. It is made to encourage her to want to go to school. Each day that she goes, she can add a piece of this puzzle. He says he only makes 17 pieces, but it takes Melanie 40 days to complete that puzzle. So out of the 40 days, she pretty much missed over 23 days of school. According to Cope, he says Stacy continues to push the health conditions and fears onto their daughter Melanie. This is an interesting choice of word. He says that his wife is detecting her own illnesses and problems. Pretty much saying that she knows how to take care of herself over the doctors. Stacy isn't going to church. And if Stacy doesn't go to church, neither does Melanie, which means the entire family doesn't go to church. And he seems upset about that. So Cope says that Well, it seems a bit cold. He mentions how Melanie sacrifices her childhood to care for her mother. But in my view of what I'm seeing from what he's writing, he lacks to care for his wife, which is causing their child to feel responsible. I mean, I have had a sick parent my entire life, and it's just something a child, if they love their parent, they want to care for them. And if Melanie's having to take care of her 24/7, where is he? Then he brags about his good health and his ability to take Melanie, their daughter, to do fun things like play ball or go out for treats. Kind of rubbing it in Stacy's face behind her back that he's the one that does everything with her daughter, as if she doesn't want to. I just didn't understand that. I hear how he goes to the hospital and how he knows what the doctor says, but what has he done to help his wife in the documents? At least, I mean, I don't see any of that. So you kind of develop an opinion that something just isn't right there, and it's a bit cold. It's not hard to understand that Melanie must have felt incredibly lonely. By November of 1994, Stacy only weighs around 76 pounds. She's not able to absorb the nutrition like she needs to. So in the documents, this is where it gets confusing. He mentions going to Hawaii again. I don't know whether to put it in 1994 or 93, and I'm guessing we just won't worry about when this happened, but he mentions again that her hands and feet and stuff are going numb, and that instead of staying back home and getting medical treatment, she wants to go to Hawaii because that will make her happy. And all these documents that we just covered were written and submitted in August of 1995. And it's at this point that we hear that he leaves Stacy in her weakened condition. I also understand that Stacy had actually left him a few times and ends up going back to him. But this time, when they split up, it's for good. He takes his daughter away from her mother, and they just leave. And I would be curious to know as to why he did it in that manner. We have kind of speculated that maybe perhaps they were dealing with, threats from maybe Alex or something, but that's never been proven. And it's at this point that Melanie isn't around the Cox family for quite a few years. She grows up in a few different places, but it's mainly she remembers growing up in Seattle, Washington. Around this same time, this is where Lori and her LaGoya, they're not getting along, but they're still trying to make things work out. Chad Daybell is going back to Springfield Cemetery. On February 25th, 1998, her second divorce is finalized. Like I mentioned before, she and Colby's living with her parents. It's been a few years since Stacy and her husband have been separated and divorced. And it's 1998, on the 25th of May, that Stacy passes away from a diabetic coma. According to the information that we know, Lori had actually got in contact with Cope and Melanie and informed them that they might want to come see Stacy because she wasn't going to make it. And when Stacy passed away, her daughter Melanie was only 6 years old. Stacy was just 32 years old when she left this earth. But an interesting fact is that Alex Cox was there when she passed away, and there's rumors that he used her card after he passed away to make purchases. I never was able to confirm that. You can't help but wonder if she passed away from her taking an overdose of the insulin like she had mentioned before, or from not taking her medication. But some people believe that she passed away like Melanie's father, from the fact that she's not able to get the nutritions that she needs, and she does reject the tubes multiple times. But it's interesting to know that most of the siblings close to Stacy are very devastated by their loss. And the way that they show this later on in the future is quite interesting, especially for Lori Vallow. It's March 17th, 1999, and Chad Daybell is featured in an article about publishing his first book, An Errand for Emma. It is a fictional story set in 1968 with a teen girl who is the main character that is based on basically Chad's at the time 4-year-old daughter Emma and her personality. In this article, he says that he takes this job at the cemetery purposely, he says, in order to spend more time with the family and to have time to write books. He also shares some very strange experiences he has with ghosts during his time working there. As we approach 2000 and 2001, there's really not a lot of information I was able to collect in that timeline. But we do know that Lori has met a new man, and that's around 2001. His name is Joseph Anthony Ryan. So Lori is actually growing more concerned about end times during this period of time in her life, but it's not something that she's letting out in the open. She's also, getting closer and closer to her faith as the years go on. Lori is very active within the local church, and she will encourage her new boyfriend, husband, to be just involved as she is, or even more so. According to Joseph Ryan's sister, Annie Cushion, she describes her brother to be a very ambitious man, and she says that both he and Lori are just as ambitious as the other. They have goals. At least for his life, he has like financial goals. For Lori, it's just everything seems to be related religiously. And they get married. And the two live in this large home that some label as a mansion. For those times, this is a very nice house. So remember, Lori is a hairdresser at this point in her life, but she's not really holding down a steady job. She works out of her home and out of friends' home and even family. According to Lori's mother, she likes to make people look good. We know this. But what I've learned is it seems that Lori likes to mold other people into what she feels they should be. She especially seems to enjoy molding her men to be the same faith as her. And once they're converted, she pushes them to be a huge part in the church, including their activities and even leadership. It appears that Lori's just wanting somebody to love her faith as much as she does. But she's having difficulty finding that man that she's looking for. The church is a high priority, and she and her family attend nearly every Sunday. What I also notice is Lori's bond with the men in her life are very odd and seem quite empty. But what stands out is the people around her that are looking from the outside in. They seem to think that she has this wonderful, perfect life. I find this strange because, in my opinion, it seems that the signs have always been there. Lori is not the bonding kind. And it seems, not all of them, of course, the people in her life say these things to protect themselves from looking bad. Because if they knew who Lori was and the things that she was capable of doing, what kind of person would that make them? It's important to pay attention to how Lori supposedly bonds with her children. You might notice that her son Colby is released to Joe as soon as they get married. He has the say-so basically on everything that applies to Colby. She is very quick to let the man of the house take control of her children, at least to a certain point. As a parent, Lori feeds her children what they want, she gives them what they want, and most of her time spent with them is taking them to do things on her free time just to make them happy. So she seems like, and she's kind of like a slave to her children instead of parenting them. And I wanted to point this out before we moved on. I don't hear the kids talk about the love that they receive, the hugs they receive, and how they are cared for when they're sick. Remember that as we move forward and we learn more about the children. Lori seems to lack certain emotions, especially over her two children, but Lori is really not one of those who believe in this idea, and it makes you wonder why. After Lori marries Joe Ryan, she becomes pregnant for a second time, and she is pregnant with Tylee Ryan, which is one of the children involved with this case that end up missing later on. And at the beginning of this marriage, it seems like the perfect marriage. Joseph speaks at their church. He's doing what he can to try to make his wife happy. He's doing things for Lori that he's never done for anyone else in his life. But his sister Annie says she remembers the first time that she met Lori. But before we go there, let's learn a little background about Joseph Ryan. So according to Annie, Joe was in the Navy. He was a confident man, and he was a man that knew what he wanted. He set goals, and he would reach them. He liked to make money, and he held a job. But he had a weakness, and that weakness is that he got easily angered. Because Joe Ryan is no longer here on this earth to defend himself, I have to be careful how to address him without making him look horrible. So I refer to this witness without a defense. In other words, a one-sided story on Joe Ryan. We learned that Joseph Ryan actually adopts Lori's son, Colby, during the marriage, at least at some point. This pretty much tells us that Colby Ryan's real father is not in the picture. According to Annie Cushing, she says that her brother has spent several times reaching out to her in order to try to make their family work. But multiple times that relationship didn't last long. She said one day, or one of those times, Joe Ryan actually calls her and asks her to come out to his house. He wants his sister to meet his new wife, Lori. This says to me that he's really interested in having his sister be part of his life and taking parts of the events that mean a lot to him. She says that Joe pays for the plane tickets for her to fly out, which he's done before. And when she arrives and finally meets Lori, she says that Lori is delightful, beautiful, loving, and caring. She says that she seems to be a great parent and her kids are well cared for. According to Annie, she really didn't see any red flags until much later in their relationship. In fact, Annie seemed to have a closer relationship with Lori than her brother did. After all, Joe Ryan and Annie have a 9 years difference. Annie says that Joe is incredibly charming, while on the other hand, he is incredibly intelligent. He also puts together family events for things like Thanksgiving. But Annie still holds a bit of a grudge, stemming back to her senior year, where she's getting phone calls from her brother Joe, and he's living in Albuquerque, Mexico. He asked her to move out to Mexico so that they could be a family. She could go to college there. But she says that doesn't go so great, that he ends up having these, rage outbursts, and they end up just going their separate ways. She said that she had actually talked to Joe about getting therapy, but that's just something he doesn't like to talk about and doesn't believe in such things. But like all families who want to try to make things work, they try to get over those bad times. She says, her brother was finally hunkering down. He had pulled himself off the market, and he wanted to meet this woman that was able to get Joe to do this. And he said one thing that she thought was that Joe and Lori, when they walked in a room, they would suck the oxygen out of that room. She said that they were just madly in love. She said, "I had never seen Joe that happy." She noticed that Lori let Joe have the upper hand of Colby, and then that one day she actually witnessed Joe kind of, while he was disciplining Colby, and at one point, for some reason she doesn't understand, he pulled Colby's wrist back and then spanked Colby with a belt. Annie describes that she actually talks to Lori about how Joe is, handling that situation. So she's kind of, going in a place she probably shouldn't have. And the way that she, says that Lori handles the situation is Lori doesn't seem to pretty much think it's a big deal at that time. At one point, she actually witnessed him get triggered. And we wonder if this had to do with maybe he overheard her talking with Lori or something like that, because he went in a rage and started pretty much punching the walls. And then something else happened. She said while she was staying there, she noticed that when Tylee was just around 1 year old, or just under one, Lori pulls out a box of chemicals and proceeded to highlight her baby's hair. Annie mentioned that she had never seen anything like that, whereas most of us probably haven't either. So Lori was concerned about, how Tylee looked, and she wasn't even 1 year old, putting chemicals in her hair, molding this infant to be what she wanted her to be. There's no doubt in anyone's mind who in their right mind would put chemicals in a baby's hair. From there, Andy also described, that Joe was very temperamental. She thought maybe some of this stemmed from some sort of trauma, but we never found out what that trauma could have been. Around this same time in 2003, Chad Daybell's books are being pulled from the shelves of the desert bookstores, allegedly due to an irrelevant scene in Chasing Paradise. That scene was where a warrior angel drop kicks a naughty spirit through the wall. Chad is actually working as a manager editor at Cedar Fort Publishing at this time. Around March 18th of 2003, there's another couple going through a divorce. Charles and his first wife are having issues. For those of you new to the story, Charles Vallow will be Lori's future husband. So we want to learn a little bit of background on him. There's an incident that happens that ends up ultimately, being part of this kind of ugly divorce. And one night the kids are going to bed and they're fighting over a stuffed dog. And an affidavit seems to kind of write out something that happened that night that wasn't so pretty. Around April 2nd of 2003, the couple is actually trying to repair their marriage through therapy. And by April 9th of 2003, there's a restraining order placed against Charles Vallow. Also, April 2003, the 9th, Charles' wife doesn't show up, according to documents, to the marriage counseling. At 9:15, she calls Charles and tells him it's canceled. In documents from April 11th of 2003, Charles says this restraining order says that Charles cannot come to the residence and that he actually lives in, and he cannot have unsupervised visitation with the children. He says that this order is actually based on facts that are not true, and he gives his own account of what happened. But even before this, Charles had called the police in Travis County and tells them that his wife might be coming over to start a fight, and that threats were made to tell the kids about an affair. Who was the one that was making the threats to tell about the affair? Well, this was Charles Vallow. Something you might want to take note of too, because of how Charles handles the Lori situation later. He says he wants to see stuff get dissolved so that he can have access to the residence and his children, but he says he has no problem with sustaining distance until the court hearing. He writes, quote, "It's true, I have been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. I take medication for it. Until 2 weeks ago, my diagnosis was agitated depression, at which time my psychiatrist diagnosed me as bipolar. He names the medication that he takes and for this condition, and that he says he feels like it's working, end quote. During this time in Charles' life, he's making very good money. He's living at 1451 High Road in Austin, Texas. The house is 7,000 square feet. It's a $2 million home. It has 7 beds and 7 baths. His marriage is falling apart, but documents will give us an idea of what, he was like and what his first relationship was like. His wife at the time says she's not able to live with her husband any longer due to the fact of his temper, as we mentioned before, which is associated with his bipolar disorder. She mentions in the documents once again that he has an alcohol problem and that he has a strong addiction to this alcohol. According to her, she says that even though her husband takes the medication for this disorder, it's ineffective because he continues to drink alcohol, which somehow prevented this medication from working according the way that it should anyways. Another interesting statement that she makes is the fact that she says Charles continues to drink, and when he does, this kind of enhances the bad temper. She says her husband is verbally abusive and loses his temper often. He even threatened to run away with both of their children. But Charles has something to say about that. He says, I am not an alcoholic. I drink no more than 2 glasses of wine per evening, which is the same consumption as my wife. I do not get drunk. I have never driven under the influence with my children. And when I was recently advised not to drink alcohol with certain medications, I took his advice and quit drinking several weeks ago. His wife actually accused Charles of hitting her and being aggressive with her in some way. This ultimately is what leads to the restraining order that he receives. Charles' response to that accusation is, I have never hit my wife or threatened to. I have never abused my children or threatened to. The police have never had a domestic violence call at our home. My wife has hit me, however. The actual facts pertaining to the alleged threat to take the children from her are that we are having an argument over spending habits. Charles is referring to what he says his wife buys a $2,300 comforter that she bought without his permission. He says that day his wife pushes him, then threatened to move and take the children. Charles tells her, no, I will. He says the way that she said it happened is a fabrication. So this ultimately leads to Charles' therapist saying that they probably need a trial separation. And remember this, at this point, he is staying with a few friends. So I'm only sharing this so that we can kind of get to know, what his relationship was like prior. And I'd like to note that, they did have an unhealthy relationship, but that's at the end. I mean, they're separating. And considering the fact and applying it to Charles' wife at the time's response to Charles' death later, the fact that she never said anything bad or says she's not a very vindictive type person. Now let's go over the scissors incident. So this was April 1st of 2003, so we're jumping back a little bit. And their kids are just arguing over a stuffed dog, and that's at bedtime. There's 2 different accounts of what happened that night. According to Charles, he says that mom tells the kids, if you can't get along, then we'll just cut the dog in half and give you each a half, basically. He says that he brought the scissors to his wife, and the children got upset, of course, and ran from the room. Charles had to go get that one child from the living room and brought him back to bed. And he says there's no way that his wife even could have seen what he was doing in the living room. And you'll see why he says that shortly. He says that his wife basically just distracts everything that happened that night. And then he goes on to say how he coaches his kids and that he would like to be able to pick them up at least for an event that he put together for his kids. The two have been trying to fix an issue by even going out on dates. Now, I just want to tread lightly sharing what his wife said happened that night. And she kind of suggested that Charles was, being a little aggressive with one of her kids. I definitely don't want to make anybody look bad that isn't. Charles continues to plead with the court that he's a very devoted father. While not perfect, he has made mistakes. Needless to say, the two, split up for good. So what I want to do is actually stop here, and we'll continue later on, and apologize for so many environment changes because I've been sick, so it's taken me longer than usual, so I've been different places while recording this. Also, my intentions are not to make anyone look bad. This is based off of my opinion and my research. Don't forget, guys, these faces, we have girls missing. I've not been able to keep up with the missing girls lately either. But hopefully, I hope they get back to doing all those things. So we hit the end of part 7. I will continue to work on part 8 and the missing girls that we tried to push on this channel. And I want to send my love and hugs out to you guys. I have read your comments. I just haven't felt like, doing much of anything. And I'll try to do a post to give you guys an update of what I went through so that you have an idea. So guys, love you. Don't forget to subscribe and like. That will help the channel out. See you guys soon.